Hey everyone, today I wanted to give a quick no-nonsense tutorial for DCS World's A-18. Just going over the basics to get the plane started, turn the radar on, start locking some targets up, and then employing some air-to-air weapons. There are a ton of systems, even in this early state, that you can go through and learn, but overall, the actual basics of the plane are quite simple because a lot of things are automated. That being said, some people can go and look at all this stuff here in the cockpit and be a little bit intimidated by the controls that really you don't need to ever bother with to actually have fun with the plane. So to start out, let's go over some controls that I believe you should absolutely map to a joystick if you can. The first is obviously going to be all of the different axes you need. So we'll go over here. Need pitch for the pitch of the plane, roll, obviously, rudder. If you have pedals, this is great. If not, hopefully your joystick has a twist function that works just as well. And if not, you can employ buttons because generally, even in once you're in the air, you don't need to mess around with the rudder all that much, especially for just kind of flying around and getting the basics of everything. You also need to map thrust. I have a split throttle and only bother with one axis, but if you do have a split throttle and want to map left and right, you are able to do that. And then you have wheel brakes. Because I have pedals, I'm able to use an axis here, but if you just have one axis that you might want to use, you can just map one, or a button works just as well because again, you're generally not using this very often. So if you don't have an axis for this, that's totally fine. Let me run back to the all here. So obviously you do need to have a trigger. So you need to have gun trigger, second detent, that's when you need. This also, it says gun trigger, it also fires missiles. So that's why you want to have that. Depending on whichever weapon you have selected is what that's for. Basically, can be considered your air-to-air trigger. You also should map, if possible, your weapon selects here. So here we have select AMRAAM, select gun, select Sidewinder, select Sparrow. If possible, put this on a hat on your joystick. If not, I would suggest, because the default keyboard binds are weird, I would suggest just mapping this to 1, 2, 3, and 4. The defaults for 1 and 2 are pretty useless, in my opinion, because they only do master mode, air-to-air, and air-to-ground, and those are super easy to click in the cockpit. So you can just ignore those two, in my opinion. The next thing that I would say is pretty essential is to map your throttle designator controller down, left, right, up, and also depress if possible, because this is essentially how you move the cursor around on your radar display, which will allow you to select radar contacts and then lock them up with the depress option. The keyboard bindings are okay. You could also probably bind those to arrow keys, which would make it better. But if possible, map it to a hat if you have room for it. That's quite helpful to have. Next would be to map a speed brake. While not essential, I would say that this is probably something that is good to have, especially when you're coming into land at an airfield. You want to be able to scrub off your speed without having to do like weird, crazy maneuvers. So it's helpful to have an extend and a retract. And the final main thing that I would say that if you still have room, if you have a joystick that does have room, map the sensor control switch. You want to map the aft, forward, left, and right if possible, because this gives you different, especially if you're in dogfight mode, this will give you different options on how you can switch. I'll go over that if I do a more advanced tutorial. But this allows you, the sensor control switch right especially allows you to select the radar and move the cursor around without having to have like weapons selected or anything. But this, again, this is kind of like low on your priority list. If you don't have a HOTAS setup that has room for this, you don't need to bother with it too much. Okay, now that we have that set up, we'll go over the startup procedures, which if you don't want to go through all of the main, like the quote official steps, is very simple. Go down here on the right side, see the battery switch, right click that to on. Then go to the other side of the cockpit. We're right here by the wall, we see the APU, right click that to on. We can hear that is starting to spool up. When it's ready, a green light will illuminate. Awesome. So now we can start turning on the engines, which is the switch right below that engine crank. You can start with either one, but it's recommended that you start up the right engine first because that allows other systems to start working independently. So I'm just going to right click that to start the right engine. Now look up here on this engine and fuel display. You can see the RPM is starting to go up. When that hits 25 or above, we're able to start, like fully start the engine. So it's hit 25. So I'm going to hold right shift and home. And here you can see that move the throttle forward a bit, which fully starts the engine. That should spool up to, when it's settled at 65, that means the engine is completely spooled up. You can see it started up there. It goes to 66, and then it'll eventually settle at 65. We look back at the engine start, and you can see it's gone back to center, which means you're ready to start the other engine. So we'll give that a left click this time. And do the same thing here. Wait for the RPMs to go up. Okay, we've hit 25, so now we're going to hold right alt and home. And you can see that moves the throttle forward, and we'll start up the other engine. Come over here to the canopy, left click and hold that to close it so it's not loud anymore. There, fully closed, good there. Now we'll turn on our displays. Right click this top switch here for 2 times to turn that to the day option. Same with this one. To turn on our HUD, which we definitely need, we want to use this switch here. We'll turn that all the way up for maximum brightness. And then for our third display here, it's not necessary because it's mostly just used for a map and waypoint navigation, which we're not going to go into in this video. But we'll turn that all the way up to brightness since it goes along with the other screens. We'll come down over here into the sensor panel right here. Click on the radar switch twice to operate. That's right click. I'm just going to stop those. Go to the menu, so that way their screens are both the same. We'll acknowledge our master caution. That's all that's really worried about. We're going to, the APU turned off because both of our engines are on and powering the plane instead of the APU. We'll go here to our FCS section. Click on click and hold the reset for a quick second. And then the other thing we need to do here is set the takeoff trim. So let's look at the outside of the plane real quick. You can see the back of the plane, mostly level there. We'll hit our takeoff trim button right in the center of that dial. Look at the plane outside of the plane again. You can see that different control surfaces have adjusted themselves to give us an optimal takeoff lift. You saw that our flaps were way down here, so you can see it's a little bit hard to see. This is if you have space on a HOTAS to do that, you can map this, but we'll give this a right click, cycle that up to auto, and just back down into half. That's what we want to use for takeoff, half flaps. And now, right click the ejection seat arm so when you take off the plane doesn't shout at you. And now you're ready to take off. Before we take off, just to make things a bit easier, we'll turn on the radar screen here. You can see RDR attack. We'll click that button right here, and that opens up the radar. On this side, we'll hit EW, which stands for Electronic Warfare, which we actually have a secondary display down here for it. It's like a backup. Click on that, and then down here, a bit hard to see, but we'll hit this button. It's ALR 67 power. That turns on our radar warning receiver, which basically gives us a, this is our representation of our plane in the middle here, and that gives us a warning for enemy radar contacts, which is helpful. That we won't deal with that in this mission, but later on, it's good to kind of get used to the screen as a means to kind of keep track of where possible threats might come from. You can see there's E3 currently on here, which is a friendly plane. So we don't need to worry about that. But things that are locking us will move from this inner circle here to an outer circle. And that's how we know that that radar contact is a threat. One final thing that we might want to adjust here on our radar is this 20 here represents the range of this box. So right now each of these is 5, 10, 15, and then here is 20. So each line is kind of representing 5 miles. We might want to click that up to 40, which is a pretty decent range. And then, without going deep into explanation of what this is like a bar search for the radar. We're just going to put that into a 4-bar search. Without getting too complicated, that's a decent setting to use just for kind of scanning. This cross here on the radar means that while the radar is on, as we set down here, it's not actually, it's like in a standby mode because we're on the ground. When we're in the air, that automatically will turn off and start scanning. So we're ready to, we've been ready to go. We just kind of went over a few of the systems here. So let's start taxiing. Just, oops, one thing I forgot, which is why the plane is shouting at me. Give the parking brake here, this yellow handle, a left click, and that turns that off, so we can actually move now. So I'm using the rudder controls that we mapped earlier to steer the plane here. Notice that says NWS stands for nose wheel steering, which is controlled by the rudder pedals as well. It's like a dual function. And we'll just get taxied onto the runway. If you're in a multiplayer server with a few friends or something, kind of always decent to give a quick visual check above the runway to make sure no one's on a landing approach. Okay, just going to stop right here and give one more control option that I think would be helpful for people just starting out. Adjust controls. And you might want to, if possible, do map the undesignate / nose wheel steering switch. By default, that is S, which is not a terrible key binding to remember. So because you have S for that, and then if you're maybe using G for your landing gear when you put that up, might be a decent thing to remember. But if possible, kind of helpful to have that on a joystick. That not only if you hold that on the ground, you can see that on my HUD that's changed to NWS high, which means the wheels turn far more. Actually, let me go external so you can see that. This is the range of motion just normally. You can see that it's pretty limited. If I turn it on high, you can see the wheels turn a lot more. That's especially useful on the carrier where there's not very much room to maneuver, but the F-18 seems to have a fairly limited amount of turning circle, so sometimes even in an airfield it's helpful to have that, which is kind of like a not a bad thing to have if you can map that. Also, when we get in the air, I'll demonstrate the secondary function, which I think is more important to have on mapped if possible. So, we've already set our flaps to half, which is fine. You can even turn those to auto if you really want to. The plane is does like to get in the air, and you don't necessarily need to have those. But it's really simple now. Just put the throttle full forward. The afterburner will kick on. I'm just using the nose wheel steering to keep us straight here. When we get to about 130 or so, we can start gently pulling the stick back and let the plane kind of rise off the ground by itself. I'm going to hit G for golf to raise the gear, and then look down real quick, and then right click the flaps up into auto, and there you go, we're airborne. We're going to come back off the afterburner so I can talk through a few things before we get to a few targets that we're going to go shoot at real quick. Give a few baps too. Some symbology here on the HUD that's useful to know. This is your heading up here, this ticker tape. So right now I'm heading at about 302. This box here, number on your right hand side, is your current altitude. And this box number here on the left is your current speed. That's really all you need to pay attention to there. So, going over here to the radar. Remember I said before to map one of the sensor select switches to the right. Right now, you can see here, these two vertical lines with numbers here, that's kind of like, you can think of that as your cursor. Right now I can't move that around because I'm not in an air-to-air or combat mode. If you'd like to move that around without going into one of those combat modes, you have the sensor select switch to the right. Boop. And then you can see there's a diamond here above our radar range, which now means that this is our active sensor and what we want our controls to manipulate. So now that that's there, I can move the cursor around, which might be helpful if you're kind of like flying around and practicing just looking for targets with the radar and not necessarily wanting to engage them. Climb up just a little bit here. I have a little ways to go before we reach our drone targets out there. So we'll go over here. This is our basically our master modes. First we'll turn this from safe to arm. This allows us to fire weapons. And we have air to ground here on the bottom and air to air here on the top. We don't actually have any air to ground weapons, so we can't do anything with that, but we'll click on the air to air. And now you can see our HUD has changed ever so slightly. Here on the bottom, we have 9M6. This first bit here, the 9M, is the weapon that we currently have selected. And then the 6 here is the number. So let me go external real quick. So you can see those are the smaller missiles right there on the wingtips, and then on that dual rack right there at the inside ones. And then, remember when I said probably a decent idea to map the different weapons, either to your HOTAS or, if possible, or if not possible, then to just 1, 2, 3, and 4. That allows you to change to different weapons quickly while in a combat mode like this. So I'm going to select the Sparrows now, since we are longer range. There we go. You can see the symbology change to a bigger circle because these are a longer range missile. And then we have the 7M and 4, because the full title of the Sparrows is AIM 7. So that's where we have the 7 and then the M version with 4 of them. I did see over here on our radar, there we go. You can see there's a couple blips here. And we are at 40 miles, and they're just about in between these two, so they're probably about 20, 25 miles or so, not quite 20 miles. So, I'm going to manipulate our cursor here over to their area, and then hit the designate button that we had earlier, and that tells the radar to look in this area for targets and lock up something if you could see anything. So you can see now our HUD has changed again to a circle, and then an arrow with a range pointing to whatever we have locked up. So I'm going to turn the plane to where the arrow is pointing, You can see we have a diamond and a circle there, kind of giving us even more indication of where that target is. There we go. Now, the circle there that you see kind of right around the diamond gives you the optimal angle for the plane to shoot. You can see it's moving over to the right side. That's because the plane that we are targeting is flying to the right, and that helps us to lead the target essentially. You can see that the plane is giving me a shoot cue. Up here it says lock, shoot, and flashing, which means this is a pretty good solution, and we'll probably get a kill here. And we're also, you can see here, this is the range. This is your closure rate. Ignore that. Just focus on the range for now. You're just practicing. So we'll pull the trigger button that we mapped earlier to release a missile. There it goes. And now, because these missiles need the F-18 to give them radar information, we need to make sure that we stay locked on this target the whole way in. You can see the smoke there as it tracks the target. You can maybe even make out the plane. There you go. Gonna keep tracking, keep tracking. Let's see if it makes a hit. Looks like it may have missed. Probably missed there. Still 4 miles. We're gonna shoot another Sparrow. You can see that one's still tracking. We'll zoom in. That one looks like it might get a hit. Oh. It did not. Nope, it overflew the target. So that's how the the Sparrows aren't the greatest missile. The AIM-120s are not implemented yet, but they're much better, and they also have quite a bit longer range as well. So you can see one of the missiles hit the water there as it ran out of energy. So what we're going to do, oh, you can see down here, this is a good time to look at this. Remember if we looked at the nose wheel steering and the undesignate button? You can see the radar right now is currently stuck in the place that we told it to look. Oops, I'm going to pull up here so we don't crash. We are going to hit the undesignate button, and that allows the radar to go back to map or scanning the way it was before we locked something up. So that's good if you kind of have a target, either don't want to shoot at that target, or you want to choose a different target. One thing that I found helpful, especially when I was first starting out playing DCS, is to turn on labels. So you can see right now, my current plane just kind of shows that and then nothing else around it, right? So I'm going to hit, some missions don't allow you to do this, but if you're just training, it's on by default. But I'm going to hit Shift F10, and now you can see that I have a little blue label on my plane. Let's see, I think if I'm just going to look around and scan for them. Where are you? Well, we'll see them when I actually get a picture of where the other targets are at. But I find that it takes a little while to get used to spotting a plane in DCS. It's different from actually being able to see things with your naked eye in real life. It's harder. It's just harder for a game to emulate the way a human eye would see something from a long distance, and kind of training yourself to know what to look for in the actual game it's helpful to have the labels on, so you can more quickly figure out where you're looking for, and then kind of keep up tabs on it. But because it's you'll see eventually when we turn around. There we go. You can see the big obnoxious text there. Not the best thing to have if you're trying to go for a more realistic type mission. So eventually you do probably want to turn those off. But now, because we're in pretty close, we're going to select the AIM-9s just to show you how those work. We'll have to track these guys for a little bit, I think, because these are heat-seeking missiles, and the sun's here, so that might give us a little bit of a problem. You can hear that loud tone that we're getting now. That means that the seeker head has a solid lock on a heat source, and you can probably fire and it will track it. You can see there with the label that it's about 3.4 or 3.3 miles away, which is a little bit outside the range of this missile. So I'm going to turn the plane to this MiG over here that's closer, about 2 miles away, and allow the missile to get a lock on that. So you just kind of like get it there in the circle. It's loud. We'll fire a missile. And then you can see it is tracking. So let's see. With the sun, it might have a bit of a tough time tracking. We'll see. Oh, it looks like it's on a pretty good course. Nope, it lost it because of the sun. So we're going to quick turn in again real quick. I'm going to slow down so I don't overshoot. Actually, this about a mile or so. Actually, this one over here is a little bit further away. But these have a range from like 3 miles max, probably more like 2.5 to about 1 mile or so. So this one's looking pretty good right there. It's got a good tone. So we'll go ahead and fire the missile. So it's tracking. That's looking pretty good. And there we go. Gave him a nice boop, and he's down. Now, if you selected, or if you did map, this is a bit more advanced. We've kind of already gone through the basics there. I would say using this radar screen here to look for targets and then select them up at a longer range, then throwing some sparrows at them, and then going in close here with the AIM-9s is basically the basics. You can kind of go ahead and do a lot of different practice there with just that knowledge. But if you wanted to go ahead and go a little bit more advanced, because we talked about the modes earlier, the sensor select switches. Remember the if you use that right, that puts the diamond on the radar screen here. If I wanted to go into a close range, like combat mode, I'm going to press up on the sensor select switch, and you can see that change here. We have another circle around the right here. We have a dotted line circle around the AIM-9 circle, and that means that that's called bore sight mode, where the radar is specifically searching in this area. So I'm just going to put the nose up here and put this target right in that bore sight. There, and you can see that the radar locked it up, and it's feeding extra information to the AIM-9 and giving me a shoot cue. So this allows me to even if it goes out, it's allowing me to track the target a little bit easier. I'm going to deselect that, remember, with the nose wheel steering button. That puts it back to normal out of that mode. Then I'm going to press up the sensor select switch up again, back into bore sight mode, and now I'm going to press it down. This gives me another option here, which is the horizontal scan. So the radar is basically going up and down like this rather than kind of just focusing in the bore sight area. So it's going up and down like this, which is very helpful if you're in a turn fight with another plane, because it's looking up and down here. If you're turned like this and pulling hard G's to try and get a lock on another plane, with the radar looking up and down like this, if the other plane is, say, like right here, and you're turning to try and match him, it's a lot easier to get a lock there. So this guy's not really doing a hard turn, but let's pretend that he is. We're going to try and get him lined up there, and you can see it was in the horizontal, the two horizontal bars there, and locked it pretty quickly. So we'll put it there. Already has a lock. We have 1.7 mile range, which is definitely within the A9. So we're going to go ahead and pull the trigger again. You can shoot any time, but the having that circle in the middle again, you can see we gave him a nice boop, and he's going down. But as you can see, the circle there, that gives us like the optimal launch angle for the missile on that plane. You can shoot without, so I'm going to shoot there. You can see it still tries to track, but that just means the missile might miss. It's going to have to work harder, essentially, to go and hit the target. So we've used a decent amount of our munitions here. Just left with... Actually, we used all of our external munitions as well, so that's good. If you still have some... let's undesignate to turn that off. And since we're done shooting at things, I'm just going to... You don't have to do this, I'm just going to go ahead and switch off the air-to-air mode. And we'll start heading back. We'll zoom in and see if I can't get a decent spot on where the airfield is at. I think it's right over there. So, we don't really have many munitions left on the plane. But if you did, and wanted to make your landing a little bit easier, I'm just going to go over how you would get rid of those. So these controls here, or these buttons here, correspond with positions on the plane. This is the center, which, let's go external. That's where my centerline fuel tank is at. So that's the tank that says Wolfpack on it. Then you have left inside, right inside, left outside, or left outside, right outside. Those are the two positions under each wing. So right there, you can see right there, this one is the right outside, this is the right inside. And same for the other wing. So any position that has a triangle there, that's what you want to get rid of. We'll just go down here until we have the horizontal arrows there. I'm going to right click until we get the rack launcher, and then just click and hold jettison. There, now you can see, we'll go back to the external. You can see the bottom, or the wings of the plane and the centerline tank. It's nice and clean. So if you still had missiles on your plane, those would be gone. That gets rid of the extra weight and just makes the landing easier because you're not dealing with a heavier plane if you don't have to. Okay, so we are online now for a landing, but we are still far too fast. Landing gear is deployed at around 250 knots, and you can see we're about 200 over that. So I'm going to deploy the air brake. Just holding the button down to put it up all the way because it is positional. So I put it down a little bit there, put it up a little bit. That's going to help slow us down. Then I'm going to just angle the nose of the plane. This is obviously where your indicated flight path is. I'm just going to put that at the end of the runway. I'll zoom in so you can see. I just want to keep that at the end of the runway there, kind of where the black marks are at from all of the tire skids. And just keep it in that general area to start with. Because this is a no-nonsense landing. We're not trying to do everything by the book. We just want to get down so we can put more missiles on or get some more fuel and get back up to practicing.
Altitude.
I have the throttle all the way back, air brakes in. I'm going to go over here, put the flaps down to full, so it's 2 left clicks. Generally do that around the same time as the landing gear, so around 250, but I'm just doing it so when the gear is down, it makes it a little bit more difficult to see, so we're just going to do that. And we're close enough to 250, so I'm going to hit G for golf to put the landing gear down. Now you can see you do get an E bracket to kind of like make your landing precise and the way that it's done by the book, but we're going to ignore that now because, like I said, this is specifically just to get a no nonsense, just to get the plane back down. So you can see we're getting down to about 150, so I'm going to throttle up a little bit. I'm going to put the air brake off, and then just pull back and focus on keeping the flight path indicator right there around the end of the runway. Slowly making small adjustments, not going too crazy. Keeping the speed around 150 or so. Making small adjustments. You can see we're kind of getting on our on speed just by mistake. I'm not trying to do that as we come down. And then, there we go. Hit the ground throttle all the way back. I'm going to put the air brake out again just to help slow the plane down, and then steer with our nose wheel steering, or our rudder actually, to control the nose wheel steering. And just keep us in the middle or so. And you can see that we're slowing down fine with the air brake out. We don't need to use wheel brakes, but you might need to. Or you can just use wheel brakes instead of the air brake if you prefer to do that. And that's us down. Just going to go ahead and taxi over here using the rudder controls once again. Oh, you can see Big AWACS plane decided to come join us here at this tiny little airport. But yeah, that is basically it. We went over a few things here, but generally these are all pretty basic. Like if you remember the startup, battery on, APU on, green light allows you to start up the engines. Wait till it hits 25 and then right shift home. And then for the left one, right alt home. That gets you started and ready to get in the air. And then, yeah, just the actual employment of the weapons is pretty simple. And really, while there's tons of controls here, you can see that just to get up and practice things, we didn't really need most of them. And we'll just click that up to half. The master mode, or the master caution here is just for trim. We can ignore that. And yeah, that is us going out, deploying air-to-air weapons for practice, coming back, landing nice and safe. Just to go over real quick, if you were to put more weapons on and more fuel on, I usually will give the FCS a quick reset, and then just make sure before you take off again to hit the takeoff trim button, just to make sure that your trim is all set to take off, and then once your weapons and you're fueled up, you're ready to take off again. Hopefully this was helpful. I did try to stay away from a lot of jargon and unnecessary things that you don't need to do when operating the F-18 in a basic manner. If you have any questions, feel free to comment below, and I'll do my best to answer in a simple way. And hopefully this gets even more people that are maybe a little bit interested in the F-18 but not sure if it's really their thing, to give it a try, because it's a lot of fun. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you next time.